The little boy's head went under the rushing water and popped up again like a small, frightened bird. His arms thrashed, but the rope around his wrists pulled him down. A torn piece of cloth covered his mouth, so his cries were only muffled sounds. Christopher Hale had never run so fast in his life. He had come to the quiet banks of the Hudson River outside Albany to clear his thoughts after another long week of business meetings. But the sharp splash and the faint whimper he'd heard made his heart race like a drum. Without thinking, he dropped his expensive leather shoes and leapt into the icy water. The river gripped him, cold and wild, pulling at his heavy coat. He pushed forward, eyes fixed on the tiny figure sinking beneath the dark surface. "Hold on," Christopher shouted, though he knew the boy couldn't answer. He reached him just as the child's head slipped below the surface. Christopher Dove grabbed the boy's thin shoulders and kicked hard toward the shore. His chest burned, and for a moment he wondered if they would both be dragged away. But the bank came closer, and with one last effort he pulled the boy onto the wet grass. The child was no older than 7. His face was pale, lips almost blue. The cloth gag was tied across his mouth. Christopher's hands shook as he ripped it away and pressed on the boy's chest. "Come on, breathe," he whispered. The boy's body stayed still. Christopher counted under his breath and pressed again. Then at last the boy coughed, a weak sound that grew into a harsh cry. Relief flooded through Christopher. He wrapped the boy in his own soaked jacket. "You're safe now," he said gently. "You're going to be okay." The child's eyes opened slowly, wide, gray, and full of fear. He clung to Christopher's arm but said nothing. His gaze kept darting to the dark trees at the edge of the river, as if he expected someone to appear. Christopher followed the boy's stare. The woods were silent, except for the low hum of the river. Yet the hair on the back of his neck stood up. "Who did this to you?" he asked softly. The boy shivered and hid his face against Christopher's shoulder. Then a sharp crack. A branch snapping deep in the trees. Christopher stiffened. He turned his head toward the sound. The light of the late evening was fading, and the shadows under the trees grew darker. Another crack came, louder this time. Someone was there. Watching. Christopher tightened his hold on the boy. "Stay behind me," he whispered. The child gripped his sleeve tighter. Christopher's heart pounded as he scanned the woods. He had no idea who might be hiding there, or why someone would tie a boy and throw him into the river. But he knew one thing: whoever it was hadn't gone far. Somewhere beyond the thick branches, another footstep crunched on dry leaves. Christopher swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the dark woods, waiting for whoever, or whatever, was about to step into the fading light. The sound of that footstep was sharp, like someone stepping on dry twigs. Christopher's chest tightened. He pulled the boy a little closer, his palm resting on the child's damp hair. "Who's there?" Christopher called out, his voice low but steady. No answer. Only the soft rush of the river and the distant cry of a bird. Another twig cracked. Christopher's eyes narrowed. He had built his business by trusting his instincts, and right now every instinct screamed danger. He moved backward slowly, keeping the boy behind him. The wet grass squished under his bare feet. His leather shoes still floated near the bank, forgotten. A figure stepped out from behind a tree. It was a woman. Her hair was tangled and her clothes, an oversized sweater and jeans, were soaked from the knees down. She looked no older than 30. "Don't hurt him," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "Please, I can explain." Christopher tightened his grip on the boy's shoulder. "Explain?" This child was tied up and thrown into the river. Tears welled in the woman's eyes. "I didn't do that. I'm the one who untied him. I heard him crying before you came. But then I heard footsteps behind me and..." She glanced over her shoulder toward the dark woods. "Someone else is out there." The boy pressed closer to Christopher, his small fingers clutching the billionaire's soaked shirt. Christopher studied the woman. Her face was pale and frightened, but there was no cruelty in her eyes. "Who are you?" he asked. "My name is Julia," she whispered. "I live near the old mill. I walk this path every evening." Christopher believed her, but that meant someone else had tried to drown the boy. He knelt and turned to the child. "What's your name, son?" The boy opened his mouth, but no words came out. His lips trembled. Julia crouched beside them. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe now," she said gently. For a moment there was only the sound of the river. Then the boy whispered, "Daniel?" Christopher's heart gave a sudden, hard thump. The name struck him like a memory he couldn't place. "Daniel?" Christopher repeated softly. "Do you know who did this to you?" Daniel shook his head quickly and buried his face against Christopher's arm. Before Christopher could speak again, A loud splash echoed from farther up the river. All three of them froze. Another splash, closer this time. Julia's eyes widened. "Someone's coming," she whispered. Christopher's mind raced. He was standing barefoot, clothes dripping, with a terrified boy clinging to him and a stranger at his side. Whoever was out there had already tried to kill Daniel once. The evening sky darkened to deep blue as the last rays of light disappeared. Then came the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps approaching through the wet grass. Whoever it was, they were heading straight toward them. Christopher's heartbeat hammered like a drum. The sound of those footsteps was slow, heavy, and unhurried, like someone who knew exactly where they were. He pulled Daniel tighter against him. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Julia edged closer, her wet sweater clinging to her arms. A man stepped out from the shadows of the trees. He wore a dark raincoat and a wide-brimmed hat that hid most of his face. In his hand, a walking stick tapped the ground with every step. Christopher raised his chin. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer right away. He stopped a few feet from them and tilted his head as if studying the scene. His voice, when it came, was deep and calm. "You shouldn't be out here after sunset. The river can be dangerous." Christopher's eyes narrowed. "We just pulled a child out of that river. He was tied up. Do you know anything about it?" The man's face stayed hidden beneath the hat. He tapped the stick twice against the damp soil. "A child?" he said, almost as if the word tasted strange. Daniel buried his face deeper into Christopher's chest. Julia placed a shaky hand on the boy's back. "Yes, a child," Christopher said firmly. "His name is Daniel. Someone tried to drown him." The man tilted his head again. A low chuckle slipped from his lips, soft but chilling. "Strange things happen near this river," he murmured. "Not all of them meant to be understood." Christopher took a step forward. "This isn't a game. Tell me if you saw anything." The man's chuckle faded. He raised the walking stick slightly, pointing toward the deeper part of the woods. "If you care for the boy's safety, you'll leave. Now." Julia gasped. "What do you mean? Who are you warning us about?" But the man turned without another word. His figure disappeared into the dark trees as silently as he had arrived. The forest went quiet again. Only the river's whisper filled the air. Christopher's shoulders tightened. He didn't like being left with more questions than answers. "We need to get Daniel somewhere safe," he said. Julia nodded. "My cottage isn't far. Just past the old mill. We can call the police from there." Christopher looked down at the boy. Daniel's small hands trembled. "Will you be all right if we walk a little?" Daniel nodded faintly, his eyes wide. They started down the narrow path toward the mill. The night grew colder, the sky black as ink. An owl hooted somewhere high above. Halfway to the cottage, Daniel tugged at Christopher's sleeve. He knows my name," the boy whispered. Christopher stopped in his tracks. "Who does?" "The man with the stick," Daniel said, his voice barely a breath. "He whispered my name before you saw him." Julia's eyes widened in the dim light. "But we never told him." Before Christopher could speak, a sharp cry split the night, coming from the direction of the cottage. A woman's scream, long and terrified, echoed through the trees. The scream ripped through the night like a blade. Julia froze, her eyes wide with fear. "That came from my cottage," she whispered, her voice trembling. Christopher grabbed Daniel's hand. "Stay close to me." He quickened his pace, pulling them along the dark path. The trees loomed like tall shadows. Twigs snapped under their feet as they ran. The river's whisper followed them like a warning. When they reached the old mill, the faint glow of Julia's cottage came into view. The small wooden house sat at the edge of a clearing, its windows lit by a flickering lantern. But something was wrong. The front door was open, swaying slightly in the wind. Julia's heart pounded. "I locked it before we left," she said, panic rising in her chest. Christopher placed a finger to his lips, signaling for silence. He stepped forward, moving carefully toward the door. The hinges creaked as he pushed it wider. The living room was a mess. A chair lay on its side. The small rug was bunched up as if someone had run across it in a hurry. The air smelled of wet earth and something metallic, like rust or blood. Daniel clung to Julia, burying his face in her skirt. Christopher scanned the room. "Hello." His voice echoed, met only by the distant drip of water. A sudden thump came from the back room. Julia gasped. "That's my mother's room." Before Christopher could stop her, she rushed toward the door. He followed quickly, motioning for Daniel to stay hidden behind the overturned chair. Julia flung open the door. The room was dimly lit by a single candle. Her mother, Mrs. Bennett, lay on the floor, her gray hair spread across the wooden planks. "Mother!" Julia cried, dropping to her knees. Mrs. Bennet groaned and slowly opened her eyes. "Julia, is that you?" Christopher knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" Mrs. Bennet winced, touching her head. Someone was here." He asked about a boy. Julia's heart skipped. "A boy? Daniel?" Her mother nodded weakly. "Yes. He knew the boy's name." Christopher's jaw tightened. "Did you see his face?" Mrs. Bennet shook her head. "Only his hat, and a stick tapping the floor." Julia's breath caught. The man from the river. Suddenly, a loud crash came from outside, the sound of glass shattering. Christopher sprang to his feet and ran to the window. A dark figure darted across the clearing, moving fast toward the trees. Julia clutched her mother's hand. "Who is he? Why is he after Daniel?" Christopher turned back, his face set and grim. "Stay inside. Lock the door." But before Julia could answer, Daniel's small voice broke through the silence. "He left something," the boy whispered. He held out a piece of damp paper, crumpled in his trembling hand. Christopher unfolded it. A single sentence was scrawled across the page in rough black ink. "Return what belongs to me, before the next full moon." The candle flickered as a cold wind swept through the room, and somewhere in the dark woods, the sound of a stick tapping echoed once more. The wind rattled the cottage windows, carrying the faint echo of that eerie tapping. Julia pulled Daniel close, her heart hammering. Christopher tightened his grip on the damp note. The black letters bled slightly in the candlelight. "Whoever this is," he said, his voice low, "he knows exactly where to find you." Mrs. Bennet struggled to sit up. It was the same sound, the tapping stick. Like a warning before he came inside. Christopher helped her into a chair. "You need to rest. Julia, lock every window." Julia rushed from one window to the next, sliding bolts into place, her hands trembling. Daniel clung to her skirt, his small eyes wide with fear. "Why does he want me?" Daniel asked in a whisper. Julia knelt so they were eye to eye. "You are safe here," she said gently, though her own voice quivered. "We won't let anyone hurt you." Christopher studied the note again, his brow furrowed. "Return what belongs to me, before the next full moon," he repeated. What does he think belongs to him? No one answered. The only sound was the candle's soft hiss and the steady drip of water outside. Then a loud bang shook the door. Everyone jumped. "Who's there?" Christopher called, his voice sharp. "Pause." Then a man's voice, rough and deep, floated through the night. "Open up. I know the boy is inside." Julia's heart stopped. She pressed Daniel closer. Christopher moved toward the door. "You're not welcome here," he said firmly. "Leave now." The man laughed, a low, bitter sound. "You cannot hide him. He is mine by right." Christopher's jaw clenched. "If you come closer, I will call the police." Silence. Then the crunch of footsteps retreating into the darkness. Christopher waited a long moment before speaking again. "He's gone for now. But he'll be back." Julia's mother reached for Julia's hand. "This is about the boy's past," she whispered. "We must find out who he really is." Christopher nodded. "Before the full moon. We don't have much time." Julia turned to Daniel, her voice soft but firm. "Daniel, do you remember anything? Anything about your family before the river?" The boy shook his head slowly. I remember a house with a big garden," he said at last. "And a man with a silver watch. He said he would come back for me." Julia exchanged a quick glance with Christopher. "A silver watch," Christopher repeated. "Did he tell you his name?" Daniel's brows furrowed. "I think Henry. Or Harry." Mrs. Bennet gasped softly. "Henry Rowe." Christopher turned to her sharply. "You know that name?" Mrs. Bennet nodded, her face pale. "Henry Rowe, the billionaire who vanished from the public eye after his wife died. People said he lost something precious, something he would do anything to get back." Before Christopher could reply, another sound sliced through the night, a sharp, deliberate knock at the back door. Everyone froze. This time the tapping stick followed, slow and steady. Tap, tap, tap. The slow tapping at the back door grew louder, each knock a pulse of dread. Tap, tap, tap. Julia's breath caught. She pressed Daniel behind her, her arm firm around his shoulders. Christopher moved toward the back door, every step measured. He held a heavy iron poker from the fireplace like a weapon. "Stay here," he whispered to Julia. The cottage seemed to shrink around them. The only light came from the flickering candle, casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. Christopher drew in a deep breath and yanked the door open. A tall man stood in the moonlight. His coat was soaked from the rain, and a silver watch gleamed in his hand. His hair, streaked with gray, clung to his forehead. Daniel's small gasp broke the silence. The man lowered his hood. His face was strong but weary, his eyes sharp with longing. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said quietly. "I'm here for my son." Julia's knees weakened. Christopher tightened his grip on the iron poker. "Who are you?" The stranger stepped closer. "My name is Henry Rowe." He held up the silver watch, its surface catching the moonlight. "This belonged to Daniel's mother. She gave it to me before she passed. I have been searching for him ever since." Daniel peeked from behind Julia's arm, eyes wide. "You know my mama?" Henry's voice cracked. "She was my wife. And you are my boy." Daniel blinked, his small chest rising and falling as if the night itself held its breath. Julia felt a rush of warmth and confusion. This was the billionaire the town whispered about, the man who had once vanished from society. Henry crouched, his eyes level with Daniel's. "I lost you when you were a baby. Your mother wanted you safe while I fought to protect what was ours. I never stopped looking." His voice trembled with emotion. Daniel stepped forward slowly, his little hand reaching out. Henry opened his arms. The boy leapt into them, burying his face in his father's coat. Tears stung Julia's eyes. Christopher lowered the poker, his shoulders easing. Henry looked at Julia, gratitude softening his gaze. "Thank you for saving him," he said. "I owe you more than words can say." Julia swallowed. "We only did what anyone would do." Henry shook his head. "No. Not everyone would risk their lives for a child they didn't know. I will make sure you are never forgotten for what you've done." Daniel lifted his head, smiling through tears. "Papa?" Henry hugged him tighter. "Yes, son. Papa's here now." Outside, the storm began to clear. The clouds parted to reveal a calm stretch of sky, the moon casting a silver glow over the quiet river. Julia stepped onto the porch, breathing in the fresh night air. Behind her, Henry whispered to his son, "No one will ever take you away again." And for the first time that night, the tapping stopped. The darkness held no more fear, only the soft sound of a father's heart finding its way back to his son.